So our top story first, massive disruption across the world following that worldwide IT outage with reports of planes being grounded, TV channels going off air, hospitals and GP services affected in various countries, supermarket checkouts failing and banking services stalling as well. Thankfully, from what we can tell, very little effect whatsoever in Northern Ireland so far. I'll bring you a more detailed update in a moment, but let's first speak with Emily Taylor, Chief Executive of the cyber intelligence company Oxford Information Labs and editor of Chatham House's Journal of Cyber Policy. Welcome, Emily. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, William.
In layperson's terms, what has gone wrong here?
This is, it seems like, and very lots of health warnings here because it's a very rapidly developing story, and so, you know, a lot of detail will come out afterwards. But this seems like a human error event rather than a malicious attack. The source of the problem appears at this stage to be with the security company Crowdstrike, a really well-known and very respected company. It has a product called Falcon, which protects systems against malicious attacks and hacking, and is, you know, so the people who've been affected by this have kind of done the right thing. They've thought about their cybersecurity and they've implemented some protections. Unfortunately, in this case, the protection itself has been the cause of harm.
So ironically, the attempted lock on the door has blown the door off.
Well, it's affecting people who use both Crowdstrike and Microsoft, and that's of course a huge population. And as we were just hearing in your news bulletin, when things go wrong with software that almost everybody uses, it affects almost everything in society, and it really gives us a moment where we realise how dependent we are on a relatively small number of software providers.
So it could be that, and this might explain why some countries are seeing larger effects than others. Some companies have no effect whatsoever. Others have been brought to a halt. It could be simply this, that if you're using a Microsoft platform, if you're using CrowdStrike software, and if you tried to go through, or the system automatically tried to go through a Falcon software update, if all of that happened at the same time, you may well be affected.
Yes, and of course, you know, software updates are really important in cybersecurity. You know, we should all be updating our software because out-of-date software is much more vulnerable. And it's just awful when things like this happen, you know, because of the human impact. And of course, a lot of people today are looking forward to going away on their holidays, are in big queues at airports, or going, you know, having health issues, whatever. So it's affecting all aspects of society. But yeah, you are absolutely right that this is the impact.
I see an update there from Luton Airport, for example. Check-in is still manual, and that's been a problem in a number of airports across the way. Let me just give an update on what's happening here locally in Northern Ireland. We've obviously been ringing around trying to get a sense of where we are. Belfast International Airport have warned passengers that while its flights remain operational, there would be longer waiting times, possible delays or even cancellations, because everything is global, and if something's affected somewhere else, it'll have an effect locally as well. George Best, Belfast City Airport, say there were potentials for delays and urge passengers to check their flights. While flight operations have not been directly affected, they say there will be disruption across those global networks, and that will have a domino effect, of course. Earlier, Ryanair told us that they're concerned about potential disruptions across their network due to this global third-party system outage. Third party is a phrase we're going to hear a lot, Emily. Lots of companies want their clients to know this was not us. We did not do this.
Yes, and, you know, of course, the first instinct that all of us have in these situations can be anger and frustration, but it is also human error, very likely, that is the cause. And, you know, just to kind of you know, it is an incredibly difficult thing. These are complex systems. It's a little bit like, if you were a human being with lots of different complex health problems and you're taking lots of different drugs, they will each cure the thing that they're supposed to, but they might interact with each other in unpredictable ways. And when you're doing software updates or programming for very low-level access into computer systems, things can go wrong unexpectedly. Now, of course, the important thing is, how do you respond? How do you recover? And everybody is going through this themselves. And what it seems like is CrowdStrike, which will be the middle of the night for them in the US, for many of their staff, they have owned up to being the source of the problem. Yeah. They have developed a fix and they're rolling it out. So it's going to be very frustrating, but I hope a short-lived problem.
CrowdStrike, interesting company. They employ about 9,000 people. They have assets, according to their website, of about $2 billion. And they have been very proud of the work that they've been doing, helping people to protect themselves against breaches in their own company security. This is Elia Zaitsev, CrowdStrike's chief technology officer, explaining in advance of any of these problems that we're talking about today, explaining how this Falcon software is supposed to work.
One of the big issues that we've seen at CrowdStrike, our mission ultimately is about helping companies stop the breach. Right. And traditionally, we've been creating tools and technologies and building out a platform that's really empowered the SOC teams, the forensic teams, the incident response teams to understand if they're under attack, figure out what the scope is, what the root cause is, and ultimately prevent or eject an adversary from their environment. But a big piece of that puzzle often as you're doing that investigation is realizing, the reason or the way that an attacker was able to enter the environment is because there's a misconfiguration in the operating system, or there's a vulnerability or some other technical issue that needs to be resolved later on after the initial threat has been dealt with, to make sure that the attacker can't just come back in.
Well, that's how it's meant to work. That's the Chief Technology Officer, the CTO of CrowdStrike. Joe Tidy's also with us, cyber security reporter for BBC News. Welcome, Joe.
Hello.
This has already got the sort of journalistic brand name now, the blue screen of death. What's the latest? How much disruption has been caused globally?
Yeah, well, the blue screen of death, or the BSOD as it's known in the industry, has been around for a while, but it's very rare that it becomes headline news. And today, that's, of course, where we're at. This is probably going to be the biggest cyber incident in history in terms of the number of organisations affected around the world and the number of individuals, because, of course, it's not just airlines, it's schools, it's hospitals, it's GP surgeries, it's companies big and small, it's your local cafe. Lots and lots of people are being affected by this because of the giant footprint of this cybersecurity company, CrowdStrike.
What are CrowdStrike actually saying now? Because the most recent thing I saw is that they had identified the problem and they were now starting to advise companies on what they can do to try and fix it.
Yeah, this is the point we're at now, and it's almost it's a bit of a dangerous point, because CrowdStrike has figured out that yes, it was their software update overnight that caused all the problems. They have rewritten that code and they have sent it out to their customers. But if your computer is already blue screen of deathing, there's nothing you can do to get that piece of software onto your computer to fix it. And it requires a very manual process. We call it fingers on keyboard. So there are IT managers around the world who are running around trying to get each individual computer fixed. And if you think about the large companies like American Airlines, which now says it's back up and running, they have a well-resourced IT team. They've got thousands of computers in the company, but they've got enough people that can fix that in every branch and every checkout point around the world. Whereas if you think about smaller businesses and medium-sized businesses, they probably don't have a dedicated IT team, or they outsource that IT team. And I've been speaking to one, just to give you an idea of the situation we've got. There's one person I've been speaking to who's an IT manager here in the UK for an education company. They've got about 4,000 computers that he's responsible for. And he said that once you get in front of a computer, it is quite a quick thing to put on the corrected piece of software to fix that computer. But those 4,000 computers are spread across 5 different sites, and that requires obviously travelling to each one. So that gives you an idea of where we're at in terms of the scale of the operation to bring people back online.
Joe, where were these disruptions first noticed overnight?
Australia. And I think the reason for that is because the software update went out overnight, and that was the first major part of the world to wake up, turn on their computers and see the blue screen. So, and then what we've seen throughout the day is, of course, this wave. When I first saw this, when I woke up this morning at sort of 6 a.m., I thought, oh, that's a strange thing happening in Australia. And then, of course, it spreads and it's swept around the world. And we still haven't seen what's going to happen when some parts of the US, for example, are waking up to this. But I think the saving grace there is that hopefully by that time, people will know not to switch on their computers if they haven't already been switched on, and they'll be able to get fingers on keyboards and install the correct software update before we have any major problems. But even still, that's still a huge amount of work and a big headache for these organisations.
Our colleagues in England, our BBC colleagues in England, saying that the majority of GP surgeries in England seem to be experiencing some issues. That's according to the NHS, trains, shops, pharmacies affected as well. We can find no examples in Northern Ireland as yet of disruption caused or linked to this. But I assume that this has to do with the fact that in the NHS, pharmacies, for example, it's an electronic platform increasingly, or almost certainly in England, universally.
Yeah, and we did see in 2017 the WannaCry cyber attack, which affected many hospitals and GP surgeries around the country because they were all using a piece of Windows software that was vulnerable. The issue here, of course, isn't about the Windows software that you may or may not be using. It's about whether or not you're a customer of Crowdstrike. And I think what's interesting as well, potentially, is that so much of IT now is outsourced and third-party and managed by big service providers that even if you don't directly have Crowdstrike as your customer, they may do. And that might be where the trickle-down is happening.
Peter in Banbridge here asking if any of the phone companies like TalkTalk are affected. His internet went off last night, he says.
I haven't heard that. No, I haven't heard that. So I'd be surprised if that's the case.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Much appreciated. Joe Tidy, who's our BBC cyber security reporter. We're also talking to Emily Taylor, the Chief Executive of Oxford Information Labs. Let's bring in Ciaran Martin, Professor of Practice in Oxford University, formerly, and indeed the founding Chief Executive of the National Cyber Security Centre, which is part of GCHQ. Welcome, Ciaran. Good to have you back with us.
Thank you.
So, look, people are talking about this being human error, and it may be to do with poor coding in a software update. This I understand, but when you just go and look at this company, Crowdstrike, and even go and look at their Wikipedia page today, which was my first encounter with this company this morning when this story started breaking, you find lots of examples listed of where this company has worked with the US government in terms of deterring hacking and exposing potential cyber espionage to do with China, and a lot on Russia. Now, I know I'm a skeptical journalist, but is it too soon to say that this is just a coding error, human error? Is it possible that there is some third-party bad actor interference here?
So it's not too soon to say that, and that's always the presumption. I know that journalists and plenty of people should be skeptical, and we should always treat information critically. But at the same time, if one doesn't have any evidence for malicious activity, I think it's quite dangerous to speculate that it could be, because that can give rise to tensions. It can give rise to further undermining of public confidence. And in this case, I mean, as Emily Taylor, I think, expertly covered what we know, and we know a lot in the 12 hours or so since it happened. It is an error. I wouldn't call it a human error, because I think it's a systems error that was triggered by human error. Human error, one of the problems I think it reveals is that we're too vulnerable to human error, and that's a sort of systems problem. But I don't think that... put it this way: there would be two likely signs by this stage if it was malicious. One is Crowdstrike wouldn't understand how it happened, or they'd say there was something suspicious about what happened. It's pretty clear from what they're saying; they know exactly how it happened,
right.
And it's a huge corporate failing on their part, and they'll need to look into that, and they'll be held accountable for that in
massive
whatever way.
Liabilities, one would think.
one would absolutely assume that, but they do seem to know how it happened, which is why the fixes are starting already. And the second is, whilst this is, I think that is inevitable. They would think if they didn't know something about how it happened, then there would be more grounds to be suspicious.
Okay.
The second thing, which you'd be less certain about, is that there'd be bits of chatter by now, probably leaks from so-called government sources. The way that systems works as well as I do, saying that they were suspicious about something or other. We're not having that. We're having pretty close to categorical statements from governments saying, look, this is an error.
That's a very helpful answer. I had to ask the question, but it's a very helpful answer to explain it. The next question I have, and this is perhaps more to the point, is the reality here, and please comment on this too, Emily. The reality here is a single tech company with a corrupted software update has caused global disruptions of this kind. Now, that cannot be a safe place to be in terms of our cybersecurity, nationally or internationally.
Yeah. Well, Emily? I can respond to that. Yeah, thanks. I mean, it does feel like this. It's also the case that it's clearly the case that we are reliant on a small number of software providers, and those run through almost everything. In the jargon, we would call this a supply chain type of incident, in that the damage is so incredibly widespread, but it is not a one-off. A couple of years ago, there was an attack which emanated again through, I think, software updates in a managed service provider, and it affected kindergartens in New Zealand and food retailers in Sweden. So we do see this sort of global impact because we have global companies supplying our software needs. And I think Joe Tidy made this point as well as Ciaran, that because managing our computers and our systems is now becoming such a skilled job, many people are looking to outsource those responsibilities to experts. And in many cases, that is the more secure route. That is the responsible route. But it does mean you have to bulk up and go to the cloud. It does mean that when something goes wrong, it's catastrophic.
Ciaran?
Yeah, I would agree with the way you framed this question, William, absolutely. I think, there are several major concerns in terms of structural insecurity of the internet. So one of them relates to the dominance of companies like Microsoft. Now, this one isn't Microsoft's fault, but there have been there's a big spying operation by the Chinese on Microsoft last year, where weak security by Microsoft gave the Chinese state far too much access. So you can just see that concentration on the weak security mattering there. In this case, the suppliers, as Emily has rightly put it, has shown that a really basic failure of product control in the way it interacted. I mean, her analogy about medicines, two different medicines basically doing their job but clashing with each other, is absolutely perfect. And the over-reliance on that is a real problem. A third problem, which has appeared elsewhere in recent months, is that there are bits of internet infrastructure that are essentially maintained by volunteers for no money, but through open source that can be infiltrated and so forth. And then the fourth problem, which brings all this together, and this is what we've seen today, is that unlike in human safety, if you take an aviation, if a computer crashes, the planes in the air are landed safely by other means. But in terms of the administration of aviation, if the computer crashes, we can't cope. And we don't know what to do. We don't have the sort of backup systems that are deployable quickly enough. So we're not resilient for when these things go wrong. And that is a really serious problem. These are massive structural problems. Yeah. A lot of this tech is in America. So if you're thinking about what can the government do, well, sadly and frankly, if you're thinking the UK government, the EU, whatever it is, Crowdstrike is an American company, Microsoft's an American company. We can challenge them a bit and so forth, but fundamentally, there is a real problem about dependence on a small number of companies that largely are based here.
And Ciaran, again, I'm not trying to catastrophize this, but we need to learn the lessons of this. For government services, for security services, for the police, for the military, do we ever use this kind of third-party software as part of a cybersecurity system? I don't know if you can even answer that question. But if we do, that is a vulnerability.
Yeah, so, I mean, to sound literally like the Sir Humphrey Appleby I used to be...
I couldn't
the answer
possibly
to that
comment, I know.
Well, no, it's not that. It's actually the answer. The answer is, it's one of his other stock phrases. The answer is yes and no.
Oh, right, okay.
So the yes part of it is, there'll be parts of government, and we saw this. I mean, look at the London Healthcare Service or the Healthcare Service. Look what happened to London Healthcare in the last few months, where a malicious attack on some digital infrastructure brought some major London hospitals to 10% of capacity. So there are parts of public services that use this stuff. There will be parts of, security services that use this for administrative work as well. So, governments and key services, including parts of the security establishments, may be affected by this. The no, however, is on those sort of operationally critical systems. You wouldn't be just relying on the single point of failure.
So critical infrastructure and national security services.
Well, certainly national security services.
One would hope.
You wouldn't be relying on sort of for major military operations just on Windows staying up. But there'd be parts of the Ministry of Defence.
It is a kind of a relief, isn't it?
But that said, there would be parts of the Ministry of Defence that would find their work a lot slower and more difficult.
So what you're telling us is that the military use Apple?
Now I'll get into that. I couldn't possibly comment on that.
Let me take a call from Claire in Belfast. Hi, Claire.
Oh, hi there, William. Something I actually do for a living is the security of very large systems, and I think we have to think about the strategy that the government have here. At the moment, when we're putting in systems, we're being asked to look at cloud first. So the idea of why have it on premises when you can put it in the cloud? It's cheaper. We don't need staff. We don't need to pay for electricity. We don't need to pay for all these things. But of course, what it introduces is a single point of failure that you've no control over.
Yeah.
And that's a major vulnerability. I've seen previously in systems where the government here where the whole thing's been taken down because of things with Microsoft, with Teams, with Crowdstrike. It previously has happened. The hackers took it out one time and that knocked out half the internet for the world, near enough, because so many things were going through it.
Really important point. Yeah, really important point. Thank you for that, Claire. I'll put that to Emily. This cloud first policy or cloud only policy, it's a bit like putting all of your top brass, all your top politicians, all your top military, all in one room. And that's not a pretty secure way to approach the protection of individuals. Why would you do that with data?
Well, I really take your point, Claire. I think it's a great point. And way back in time in our company, Oxford Information Labs, we had our metal boxes, and we did everything ourselves. And our engineers would be in their car in the middle of the night, going down to our data center to hit the boxes with a spanner when they broke. When you are a small company and you have limited resources, I still think cloud, this is probably not the greatest day to say this, but I still think cloud is a good choice because you have protection against distributed denial of service attacks that your single box is going to be really vulnerable to. You also have access to skills that you might not have as a small company, and you aren't vulnerable to that kind of your box goes wrong. It's a physical object, and that's your box, and that's it. So it's sort of it's different choices. I guess to channel Ciaran, it is a yes and no answer. But I do think we need to reflect about having that sort of single point of failure. Do we have one cloud provider? Do we have many? Do we do a hybrid solution where we have our own boxes and we can fail over in some way?
Norman here says that this shows how vulnerable this world is to cyber attack, and there is no plan B. Maybe we should go back to the old days when we had none of this technology. Too late, Norman. That boat has sailed. Typewriters are not going to do it in the world of the future or in the world of the present. In fact, we're all connected, aren't we? Hi, William. One example of this affecting Northern Ireland is Belfast Port, says this listener. We currently have 10 containers to lift and are unable to get them. and will now incur charges for the containers sitting on those docks over the weekend. So that's in effect someone's reporting to us. We've been in touch with a number of our service providers in Northern Ireland, and they tell us they're not yet affected and hope not to be. That is the police, the Northern Ireland Health Service, the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service, TransLink, Retail NI say no reports from their suppliers either, and Hospitality NI say no reports too. So it looks like we may, Ciaran, in Northern Ireland, have dodged this one, though I'm not sure why.
If that's true, it's a fluke.
Just a fluke.
And the fluke is essentially, if you're using Microsoft Windows and if you're using Crowdstrike, this is going to affect you. If you're only using one of those, it won't. Maybe. And a lot of the companies affected are quite big. Northern Ireland, some big companies, but maybe not the right or wrong ones, depending on the way you want to put it. But it's fluke.
Thank you very much. Ciaran, I know you've got to go, but thank you very much. Ciaran Martin from Oxford University. Emily, how do we protect ourselves from flukes going the other way, though?
It's very difficult because normally I would say update your software, but obviously this isn't the day to say
not the day to say that, yeah, of course.
But it is also about that resilience piece. I was really struck by what Norman said about, it does make us yearn for simpler times where we could just sort of take out a pen and paper and do everything ourselves. We love technology. It gives us great efficiency. It allows us to keep in touch with each other. We are incredibly reliant on it. And days like today remind us of our reliance. And also perhaps the fact that we're not very connected with people who are doing essential services for us. We don't know, the report from Belfast Port, it must be just so frustrating to be sitting there unable to do really essential tasks and not really understand why, or not really being able to
just
fail
nothing
over.
You can do about it. Yeah, you're just
It's just
halted.
Computer says no, you're just halted. And I think that sense of powerlessness that we all feel at times with technology, where you want to throw your computer out the window, you don't understand why it's gone wrong, and it feels like it sort of works by magic, it goes wrong by magic. And this is where we've ended up. And I hope that we can learn from these situations to make ourselves more resilient. It doesn't mean throwing away technology. Technology is great. It's about making ourselves more resilient and thinking about how do we recover from these situations, because they're almost inevitable. They are rare.
They're
this
rare.
doesn't happen.
This is the biggest one ever, apparently. Elon Musk tweeting out there, biggest IT fail ever.
Yeah, but do you remember a few years ago, Facebook, they configured a low-level protocol wrongly, and they just took all of their services offline. They disappeared from the internet. This was an error. It does
and
happen.
Happiness descended upon the world for at least a couple
Everyone
of
did
hours.
some work.
We talked to our children. We want to walk the dog. Yeah, yes. Life moved on. Can I just speculate with you, Emily, as someone who is chief executive of your own Oxford Information Labs, your own company? What on earth must it be like right now inside the headquarters of Crowdstrike?
I really feel for them, and I think from somebody in a much smaller technology company, I really feel for them. Often these corporates do present themselves as faceless, but ultimately there will be a lot of very, very stressed people working under incredible pressure to put something right. And I'm it sounds like they have got onto it. They've got onto it. They have figured it out.
But they haven't had the lawyers and getting in touch yet, I suspect. They haven't had
the lawyers, and they haven't had their internal processes. There will be a lot of very unhappy and stressed out
people. This may be one of the world's biggest class actions at this point. Who knows?
Well, I think that this will rumble on. I mean, it's one of the things that also, just a little ray of hope is that there does seem to be quite a lot of tolerance in the world for, things sometimes do go wrong. And also, I've been looking like many others.
Yeah, you must have met American lawyers. They never make that argument.
I do, yeah, that's probably true. Maybe I should just take my rose-tinted glasses off.
That's a very British attitude to things going wrong.
Maybe most people won't be that bothered if they can just recover. But I'm sure a very, very worrying day for Crowdstrike.
Thank you very much, Emily. Really appreciate it. And thank you to Ciaran as well. That was Emily Taylor, Chief Executive of Oxford Information Labs.